Welcome to Indoctrination, a weekly conversation series about protecting yourself from systems of control. I'm your host, Rachel Bernstein. Vanessa LaRose was born into Scientology as a second-generation member in San Diego, California. And she grew up in the church in the Los Angeles area as a public member, a non-C organization member, and attended Scientology-based schools in her formative years. A few years back, Vanessa faced the choice of disconnecting from her best friend and other people she knew were not SPs, suppressive people, a Scientology term, and to stay in a belief system that was causing her more and more cognitive dissonance, or to face disconnection from her parents and loved ones, a very hard choice. But she chose her freedom. Vanessa is an active volunteer in the Los Angeles animal rescue community and an avid seeker of knowledge, currently pursuing higher education and enjoying discovering her unfolding love of psychology, philosophy, and human services, and is currently on the Dean's Honor List and was recently awarded a scholarship from the Department of Psychology at her college. Vanessa has been dealing with the aftermath of the disconnection from her parents and also other loved ones for a couple of years, and was interested in coming on Indoctrination to be able to share with others some of the experiences she's had and things she's learned along the way. And she hopes her experience can be helpful to anyone listening, especially those under the radar and those struggling with depression, and to also give herself the gift of her voice, ultimately giving herself the right to freedom of speech. Here's Vanessa now.
So I am so happy to be able to have Vanessa with me today. And for those of you who are going to be listening, you're going to be able to hear a lot about her experiences. And also for people who are going to be watching on YouTube eventually, you'll be able to see her and see us talking to each other. But I have to say, Vanessa, it's really nice to see you.
Thank you, Rachel. It's really nice to be able to talk to you and see you.
Yeah, it's a treat. And so I'm really grateful that you want to be able to talk and that you were in contact about wanting to do this, because that's very significant to me. It's significant about wanting to not only share your experiences, but also be able to say that you are at this place in your life and this time in your life where it seems like you're ready and that you have some information that you've acquired that you want to impart on other people, and that you're also feeling safe enough to do it, which is, a tall order for people coming out of the situation that you came out of. So I give you so much credit just with your strength, and I look forward to hearing about what you're learning, and I look forward to learning from you today and having our listeners learn from you. So can you just spend a moment introducing yourself and who you are and what you do, and then we'll go back in time with some special effects, where I'll just ask you about your history. It's not really so special, but go ahead.
Yeah, to your point about timing, I think timing has been everything. Getting to the point where I feel comfortable and actually have the vocabulary to describe some of the things has been huge. Like finding out specific terms or new words or correct definitions that had been repurposed previously have been has been huge. And I am Vanessa LaRose. I live in Los Angeles. I was born and raised in the Church of Scientology. I left. It was a very slow process. I officially got disconnected from my dad about 3 years ago and my mom 2 years ago. And kind of just been sitting in silence for no reason. And I've been pursuing education and studying psychology, which is big because I was raised with a huge fear of it. And so, like you said, overcoming that fear and being able to talk to you about that is awesome. And hopefully it can help other people. I can share a little bit about what I've learned. And I've looked at myself kind of like a test subject in learning about all of this. And it's really interesting.
Very interesting. Okay, there's so many different directions for us to go in. I guess I'm going to jump around a little because I want, when you were just talking about being fearful of psychology and that you're studying psychology now, which is a wonderful thing. And again, I want to be able to talk to you about what you're learning and then also go back to your early history. But in the middle, you contacted me a while ago and we started talking. And, I know that hmm, you had come to me a couple of times, but I'm sure with a lot of trepidation. And so I'm wondering what that was like for you just to make the appointment, just knowing also how you had been conditioned to be fearful of that.
Terrifying. um, Definitely. In Scientology, which now I understand why, but in Scientology, mental health care and getting mental health care treatment is pretty much a fate worse than death. Like, if you take any type of psychotropic medication at any point, you are deemed an illegal PC. Um, so it's kind of like you don't even want to go there. Like, you're untouchable to your former organization if you go through with that. So it's really scary, and a lot of people turn to other things instead of going to mental health care, and that really is what I'm passionate about talking about and listening. I listened to April's episode, which was so incredible, and I was so happy that she brought up the topics of suicide because that was one of the main things that got me out, was just looking around me and seeing that I felt like I was coming from a suicide making machine, and people weren't seeking mental health care. They were just offing themselves because they really thought that the psychs were out to control their minds. And the psychs, psychologists, therapists, psychiatrists, all of them are under the same umbrella. And the first time I came to see you, it had been through contacting a couple people in the underground network, which thank God we have. There's a huge underground network, people willing to support and help you. You want to get out. And I had found somebody who was my friend, and the person just kept saying, Rachel Bernstein, call Rachel Bernstein. And finally, I was like, all right, this woman is a cult specialist. If there's any therapist who I would feel comfortable talking to, because it was a really rough time. I was being gaslighted, you know? And I needed to talk to somebody, and I was very down, and I'm so glad that I did.
I'm glad you did too. I'm taking a lot of notes while you're talking. I want to be able to talk about the gaslighting, but I also, whenever you're using a certain term that I'm familiar with, but the people listening might not be, I'm glad you defined psychs, what psychs are, which, it has this, very nefarious sort of sound to it, right? Even though psychology is
Yeah.
not a dangerous thing at all. Can you define what an illegal PC is?
Yeah. So an illegal PC would mean that you can no longer receive auditing services. PC is pre-clear, and clear is, the state of not having a reactive mind, which, in my opinion, is our human emotions. And the whole goal of Scientology is to eliminate that reactive mind and be completely analytical all the time. So yeah, that was a pretty big fear, and especially, my mother has dedicated her life to becoming an auditor of Scientology, and so to be possibly labeled a illegal PC, or I was worried too that they just had spies outside of your office, or that they could read my emails to you. Like, your fear is so strong at that point that it's not like you don't even want to text people who are out because you might get turned in. Like, it gets really dark and twisty in that tunnel. And so sitting in your waiting room for the first time, I mean, I was almost close to a panic attack. I was like shaking, and it was really empowering to walk out and also know that nothing happened, and it was felt like a very safe space, and I could share my feelings. And I hope more people find therapists to talk to if they need to.
I hope so too. And I just, again, the bravery that it took to just come to talk about your experience, knowing that you were feeling panic, just waiting in the waiting area. And something that I've talked about a little bit in the past is that there are some people from who were in Scientology who were again made to feel so terrified of going for help, that sometimes we don't even meet for the first time in my office. We'll meet in the hallway somewhere public or in the bench outside my office, and or they'll come into my office, but I can't close the door. Just sort of that desensitization therapy, that the steps that people need to go through in order to feel safe and to in order to know that I'm not up to anything. I'm there for them. Uh, and so, can you talk a little bit about the gaslighting that you were saying that you were experiencing at the time?
Um, yeah, I mean, it was very confusing to question your sanity and have everybody. I don't think nobody was uh, doing gaslighting as a strategy at the time. It was just built into the culture, right? So, like, I mean, your whole life, if you're a Scientologist and you say, I feel one way, and that's not part of the program, you don't feel that way, you know? So it's kind of gradients of gaslighting. And when I left and I was sending these really intense emails back and forth to my dad and just laying out my truth, and just being told it wasn't true and it wasn't real and that these things didn't really happen. And, also that people I knew who were good people they were telling me that they were suppressive people and they were, persona non grata at the church anymore. And that it just gets really confusing when you're wondering, like, what is real life? And especially on the cusp of when you're in Scientology and you're coming out into the real world, it feels like you're on a bad acid trip. You don't know who to trust. You don't know which side is correct. You don't know, like I remember specifically, to my dad's credit, I was having a really hard time and I said, am I crazy? And he said, you're not crazy. And he left it at that. And that meant a lot to me.
Right. Yeah. It's such a fascinating thing. I've never thought of it this way, but you're so right that it's not necessarily intentional gaslighting, but it is built into the system, that the people who are helping you but are saying no, you're not feeling this way, or if you are, it's not for the reasons that you think, or it's not because of us, it's because of you, or sort of the redirection of the pointing of the fingers and the relabeling and re-diagnosing. It is very confusing, but yeah, I think the people in it are not intentionally doing it. That's the training. Yeah.
Yeah, like you're not, you don't want to be what's called Casey or Banky, meaning that you're acting from your reactive mind, you're acting emotional. So, when you bring up things like, hey, why are all of these kids committing suicide? Oh, I have you're bringing up like real concerns, and they're telling you that's not why. This is not, this. My dad specifically over and over again said that my friend did not kill herself due to Scientology, and it was a situation where I watched her melt down on Facebook, like, how can you tell me that didn't, I mean, of course, there's a ton of factors that go into play with suicides and things like that, of course. But to not even acknowledge that that was the only mental health counseling she was getting, and, like
Mhm.
that, it plays with you a little bit.
It does. And I know the situation that you're talking about with this person who is, having this breakdown on Facebook. And that was a couple of years ago. But one of the saddest parts of it for me, reading through the different posts that she was making, was being very upfront about the fact that she knew something was tremendously wrong, that she was reeling from having been through trauma or feeling alone, and being very confused about what's real and what's not, and if it's worth it to be alive, and just a lot, asking all these sort of existential questions, and that there wasn't the response from the organization of, we're so sorry you're going through this, how can we help? It was this redirection. It was a finger pointing to her that she was doing something wrong, or kind of complaining, or just not doing the program right. And so you just don't, among other reactions, but that you just don't feel like you're held and protected, and luckily she had people throughout that who were trying to do what they could to try to prevent something bad from happening. But sometimes still getting to that point in your life is just more than you can take on, and you feel like the only way to relieve yourself of those feelings is to end your life. It's very tragic. And then seeing that even after it happened, still there wasn't a taking of responsibility.
Well, and the core belief system is that you just drop your body and pick up a new one. So it doesn't have the same context to us that maybe it would, or the same depth. Like having, being able to just drop your body and start over again makes it seem like a viable option. And through things I've learned now, like, everything is moods, moods past, right? Um, I've read some research about how they installed suicide nets for people jumping off bridges, and like suicide rates went down extreme numbers because people changed their minds afterwards, or things like that. And I just really wish that she would have been able to reach out for some different type of mental health or whatever, and also, her and I had shared a Scientology counselor, auditor for a long time, and I would see her passing. We went to the same schools. We weren't particularly close, but she was somebody who was kind of always a little wild, always a little troublemaker. And I had internally suspected maybe there was a little bit of mental illness flaring itself. And so to see that maybe Scientology was quote unquote working for somebody else, but didn't work for her,
Right.
and seeing that a lot over time.
Right. Yeah. Right. Because people are going to have different wiring. And so then they can't be given the same exact thing and have it work in the same way for everyone. That's just an impossibility. But there isn't a looking at that, well, how do we vary what we do to fit what this person needs? It's how does this person need to change to fit what we're going to be providing for everyone and to make it work. You bring up this really kind of beautiful image though of a safety net, that yeah, there have been nets put under bridges, and right, there's some people who will be caught and then be so grateful that they had this other chance, and to also see that people were out there rescuing them and cared enough to rescue them. Sometimes that's all people really want to know, and they need to know. And so I think she was needing, and she was reaching out for the group to provide her with a safety net, and it just didn't happen.
Yeah, and it's scary to even reach out to ex-members. I mean, especially in the beginning, you're so scared that everything's going to be reported back to the church, and they have a lot of money. Anybody listening to your podcast, I'm sure, is familiar with the fair game policy. Find out what it is that's important to them and wreak havoc and all of these things. So I don't know if she even had reached out to anybody in the ex community. Maybe she had. I don't know, but like, it's a lot different now, also, and the times have changed, which is awesome. I think people are getting to be a lot less afraid. I mean, this is a huge step for me. Hopefully, somebody will see me and want to tell their story and not have to live with it inside of them.
Yes. I want to be able to talk about what you are studying now. I think it would be good, though, for us to go back so that we understand about sort of how far you've come to get to this place. And then to be able to talk about why certain courses and certain subject matter matters as much as it does for now. Okay, so now I'm envisioning you as a little girl. So where were you when you were little, and what was the situation?
So I was born at home silently with no drugs as per the policy. So,
Yeah. Can you also explain silent birth and silent labor and yeah, because that's something not a lot of people know about.
yeah, the idea is that you don't want to have any key phrases or sounds of pain or anything because it would become an engram, which is like a mental image that's locked for the child starting off life. So the parents do it out of love for the child so that the child's not apparently thinking like their parents hate them or something, or that there's a term because it's a moment of pain and unconsciousness. And that is when engrams record. So I guess being born is like really traumatic. So if you can have your baby silently, and same thing with the drugs would lock the engram allegedly.
Okay. Right. So this idea was developed by a person who never gave birth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Yes, he never gave birth.
Yeah.
So, right. Because I can't imagine how that's possible, and maybe there's a way to make some sound or do something, but no, it's totally silent. And so also, it's true for anyone else in the room, including the person who is giving birth, that they can't take any pain medications and they can't express.
I mean, maybe they could take pain medication, but you can't,
Oh,
you know, it's just more the words coming into the baby's mouth. The mom just can't take pain medication or shouldn't, I mean, sure, you can do whatever you want with your body, but if you're trying to do it the right way, then yeah. To answer your question, my parents, or you didn't ask, but to give you a little background, my parents, my parents met at the San Diego org in the 80s. And my dad had just come back from traveling the world with his surfboard. He was like a super cool, interesting dude who landed in San Diego and got into Scientology. And he met my mom there and they decided to get together and have a little girl. That was her postulate, which in Scientology means like intention.
okay. Okay. So, do you know what was appealing to him about Scientology? Because here he was this free spirit doing his thing, clearly. And so, what was the appeal?
Um, he said he had tried out all different religions, and for him, this was what worked. Um, in now having a bit more context, uh, I think that he had done a lot of psychedelics. he had told me that, that's the big joke. It's just funny because Scientology is so anti-drug,
Mhm.
and so
Mhm.
he, it was the time where people were joining the Hare Krishnas, they're doing transcendental meditation, all sorts of different things. And he liked this one. And he, yeah, I mean, and my mom happened to get a personality test on her front door. And that's how she walked in.
Uh-huh.
And
Right. Okay.
I think both of them were looking for community. That's why a lot
Uh-huh.
of people
Yeah.
reach out for things like this. They want community, and it seemed like a cool community with nice people because there are nice people in there.
Right. Okay. And then also the personality test, which is so interesting, that I've learned a little bit about, and about its history also, just
Yeah.
called this Oxford.
I thought the Oxford Capacity Analysis Test my entire life, which is OCA. I thought it was made at Oxford College, like it says, and it was a real thing, and that gave it validity. And only like somewhat recently did I actually realize that he wrote the test. And I used to grade it, as working for a company that employed people, we would give this test to future employees. Like, it's
Right.
really a weird test too.
It is very something about killing lions in Africa or hunting lions in Africa.
there's a lot of there's a lot of questions on there that are just it gives you a printout, and then you have your responsibility level, your happiness level, you have all these different things. And when people are going to get you into Scientology, you're taught to find somebody's ruin, like the area of their life that they're ruined in allegedly, and you can find that on an OCA usually. If there's a low mark, then you just say, oh, right here it says relationship. What's going on with your relationship? And you get them to start talking about it. And then you give them the Scientology answer for that. Usually there's a course book or something related to what they need help with.
Wow. Okay. So the idea that, first of all, it's called Oxford, so it has this air of it being very professional and prestigious when it was just called that. And it could have been called anything, and it could have been called the Harvard whatever, or the Yale whatever. It was just made up. It was a made up thing. So the story that I remember hearing from someone who was there when it was developed many years ago, he was already elderly when he came to talk to me to kind of spill some secrets from when he had been involved in England when the he was working at the Dianetic Center, and then a seamstress was brought in to measure them all for clerical collars and clerical uniforms, and they were told that they were going to be now a church, and that they all busted up laughing because they thought that it was a prank and a joke, and it was not at all. So he said, so that's as much of a church as it is. This is his opinion. But so that was shocking. And then he said, supposedly.
Well, they were doing that because of the IRS thing at the time,
Right,
Yeah.
right. So they could get tax exempt status. And then also what that turned into, I think, was that then they could cry religious persecution if anyone said anything bad about them, like the time that I didn't want to let Scientologists who were there to harass into the support group that I was running for former Scientologists. And when I said that they couldn't be a part of it, then they said they were going to sue me for religious discrimination, is what it was.
Well, that loophole has done very well for them in the court.
Yeah, because they have all these protections then that are built in to the law when they say they're a religion.
And I do remember the night that it was announced to us at the Shrine Auditorium, and it was so powerful, that message that it sent to us as children. The war is over. We are a real religion. And I just remember being so proud.
Okay, I want to hear that story. And so, so what I heard from this guy, and then I want to hear that story, is that he said that L. Ron Hubbard supposedly was the first person to take the test. And so his answers are the right ones, so that everyone is going to then be compared to how he would answer those questions. And for people then who didn't think that he was well emotionally or psychologically, the more your answers were different from his, it was then seen as being a problem, because then you get a lower score. But really, it could be that you were actually healthier or psychologically healthy, and that's why your answers were different. That's already starting the gaslighting that you're talking about. Right?
Totally.
What? Right? Getting a low score might actually mean, if I really know the history of this test, that I'm healthier, but here it shows that I have more of a problem, right? And that's the head spinning. Okay, so you're at the Shrine Auditorium, where there are so many Scientology things happening in LA at the Shrine Auditorium. Is it still, or do they still have things at the Shrine?
I don't think that they. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah,
still I don't know if they need it anymore, but I think so. I don't know. I remember at the time being super young, being told it was a really important event. The events were always kind of fun because you got dressed up and everybody came out. And it was packed then. In the early 90s, it was really probably at the height of its membership.
Yeah.
And it was such an important event that they brought us children up from daycare into the room for the announcement. And if anybody's seen Going Clear or Leah's show, it's been shown a couple of times, this moment where David Miscavige is on stage and he says, the war is over. And it was just like so powerful. And I remember looking at it, my mom, and being like, what is this? And she said, they agree, we're a real religion. And the message that sends to you as a kid, like we were fighting a war, first of all, and now we've won it. And it definitely is like that us versus them mentality started pretty young.
Right. And I think also just that moment too, how I'm thinking of the word crescendo, that there was like so built up.
Like balloons dropping and fireworks. Like it was really stuff.
Wow. Okay.
He was very proud of what he had pulled off. And let me tell you, I mean, he really pulled off something. He got them tax exemption status, which they still have to this day. So
I know. Which
yeah.
blows my mind. That blows my mind. With all that's known about, blows my mind. So, okay. All right. So here you were talking about how your dad was getting sort of sucked in through, attractive women, but also in a more serious way, the need for community and connection, which you're right, is the driving force for a lot of people. And your mom got this personality test on her doorstep. And then how did they meet each other?
Apparently, my father had audited my mom a time or two, and then he had left to go on a surf safari, and she had always said, "Hey, where's that cute Dave LaRose?" And so then they ended up getting together. Another thing, while you were talking, reminded me. Another thing, aside from community, what I think my mom, at least, I know most people do better. My mom, in particular, with structure. It provides structure for people, and
Mm,
it provides um, a path, and
right.
that is definitely, I think, a key factor of what got her in and kept her in. But yeah, so they met, and I don't know, it wasn't the grand love story from what I hear. My dad didn't have any kids. My mom had my two brothers, and they were, I think, about 10 and 11 or somewhere around there. And my dad did really well with them, and they got along awesome. And she said, "All right, well, if you want to keep hanging out, let's get married and have a little girl." And that's what they did.
And so then you then went to Scientology schools, or what
Mhm.
was the story? I'm assuming. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so we started off in San Diego, and I went to a school called Apple School. Um, I don't remember much from it. My brothers had gone there when they were younger, and then their father, I believe, fought pretty hard to keep them away from Scientology schools and stuff. So they were more on the public education spectrum of things.
Okay.
Um, and I don't remember too much about Apple School, but then we moved to LA pretty quickly. I think I was about 5, and we moved in right across the street from the Celebrity Center to the Shangri Lodge, which was where a lot of Scientologists lived at the time, and probably I think still do.
Uh-huh.
And so that was it was hard because we actually my brothers didn't come. They were, I think, 15 and 16 at the time, and stayed in San Diego. And we moved up to Los Angeles. I think my dad had a job, and I think the San Diego real estate market had crashed. And so, and my mom wanted to study the briefing course full time, which is the course that teaches you how to be an auditor. So we moved up here. I guess the plan was that we were only supposed to be here for a couple of weeks and then go to Clearwater, and we never went to Clearwater. We stayed here. Um, Celebrity Center was a really cool place to grow up with as your backyard. They have beautiful facilities. It's the old, I think it's Chateau Elise property. It's on Franklin, and super beautiful. And I spent years there. I started my first Scientology processing. I think I was about 5 or 6, and I always liked it there. It was a beautiful place, and I had friends and all of these things. I also went to the school that Leah Remini's mom had in Los Feliz. It was called Academy for Smart Kids. And
I love that. It's like it just cuts right to the chase.
just right to the chase.
Yeah.
And
No mystery.
no, we're not
Right.
elitist at all.
Right.
No.
Exactly.
And so it was basically like a homeschool with 20 kids or so, and we were all taught based on Scientology, but we were taught important things like how to learn, how to read, and how to write, and of course learning how to learn, which is a Scientology educational book.
Right. So, a couple thoughts. First of all, about Apple School and then this other school, Academy for Smart Kids, Smart Children. So, I have talked to a number of people who went to schools that were run by the group that they were in. Some were okay, but others, in retrospect, didn't really prepare them for kind of mainstream learning and mainstream life. And they felt that they had lagged behind when it came to skills and also being able to learn and question and have other viewpoints and sort of learning how to process other sources of information because there were no other sources of information in these groups. And so I wonder when you're talking about learning how to learn, so how does that get translated in Scientology? What does that mean?
Um, there is a very specific book called Learning How to Learn.
Mm-hmm.
And it means in Scientology that there are three barriers to study. The first is lack of math, or the second, I'm not sure which order anymore. Lack of math, there's misunderstood word, and then there's skipped gradient. And if you have any of those things, then you wouldn't be able to learn a topic, which they always hail the study technology as like, which that falls under it's L. Ron Hubbard's study technology. They always hail it as like miraculous, and I always thought it was until I actually like in real time now study things on how to study, and it's completely different, completely different. So yeah, we studied a lot of study courses by L. Ron Hubbard in order to study other material.
And I know that there has been a push to try to get some of these textbooks and some of the curriculum, some of the L. Ron Hubbard curriculum into public schools and private schools, and sometimes they've been successful. Um, so I know the middle one that you talked about words, there's a whole word clearing, and that's, I mean, I think there's
Yeah.
something so dissociative about how many hours you spend on every single word, every single word. The lack of math, can you describe what that is?
Yeah, lack of math, and to give people a little bit of understanding or math, okay, on the
Got it.
topic of what
Uh-huh.
you're talking about. Um, a misunderstood word. So basically, you have to read things, and then usually people go through and they give you what's called a star rate checkout, where they pick out the big words or they pick out unusual words and ask you to define it. And if it's not up to their standards, flunk, you have to look up the word, then you have to restudy your material, and then you go back and do it. So that's just arduous and really intense and sometimes really silly words that you know the meaning of, but you just can't put together it just gets a lot of time. And lack of math is when you are studying something that, say, is pretty wordy, like you were learning about globes, but you had never seen a globe, right? Like, how are you supposed to envision that? You need to see in front of you the map. And so they have different techniques for getting that. You can look at pictures, or you have what's called a demo kit, a demonstration kit, and you do things to represent certain concepts or ideas with that demo kit, or you do the least favorite as a child, a clay demo, where you have
Oh,
to put a concept into clay and get checked out by the supervisor. So, like, having to conceptualize words like responsibility is very hard in clay at a young age, but we pulled it off.
wow. Even putting tree in clay when you're a young kid,
Yeah.
something that's very tangible. I mean, that's still hard. So having it be a concept, something intangible. Wow.
Yes.
Wow. That I'm sure it also took a lot of time. And in retrospect, I mean, we could spend a lot of time talking about this, and I want to be able to go back to other things. But in retrospect, thinking about how much time was spent on these sorts of things, it could be that it has a lasting impact that's valuable, and it could be in retrospect that it wasn't. And sometimes it's a combination of different things. But looking back, what do you think? Was there something of value, or do you feel like time should have been spent on other things?
I think there was value, definitely, and the fact that people cared enough to sit down and talk with us about, are you understanding this? Kind of was the
Mm,
more valuable
right.
portion.
Okay.
I do think a lot of time is wasted, and almost ties into that gaslighting thing, because sometimes when you don't agree with an L. Ron Hubbard reference, you're told that you have a misunderstood word.
Mm,
And that is the wasted time. That's where I got hung up a lot.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
It's an easy
Right.
out.
Yes. Right. So when you don't agree, it's because you misunderstand. Okay, that's very interesting. Yeah, that reminds me of something that happened with a teacher in one of the private schools. One of the kids I know from years ago who was given a book to read and didn't really like the book, and then said, upon assessing this book, I didn't really like it all that much. And the teacher said, well, that's because you didn't understand it and you didn't read it right. Like this whole idea, like you can't somehow have your own opinion about it, and your own opinion is really valid. And so I'm sure that's also part of what you're getting a chance to experience now, that your own interpretation of something is valid, just as valid as anyone else's, because that's going to be a very different concept for someone.
Oh, it's mind blowing. Instead of learning just one person's word as science or whatever, it's
Right.
you're presented in the real world, you're presented with multiple theories and multiple answers, and you get to choose which is the one you resonate with, or which is scientific, or but there's different, not everything is black and white. And in the real world, you get to choose how you feel about things.
Right, which really engages your critical thinking. Yeah, right. Okay. Okay, so here you are at Leah's mom's school. And then what? And so your parents then were still involved. I mean, were they working for the church?
Yeah, so they were working. We moved around LA a few times. And then in 1998, my grandma, who was in San Diego, her cancer came back pretty bad. And so my mom and I went down to San Diego to take care of her while my dad stayed in LA to keep working and pay the bills and stuff and pay for their bridge. Um, and when my grandma passed away, that was like I was 9 years old, and that was the hardest summer ever. My parents got divorced shortly after there. Ironically enough, I told my mother she was an SP and I disconnected from her and I moved to Los Angeles to live
Uh-huh.
with my dad,
Okay.
and was enrolled in Delphi Academy, which is
Uh-huh.
here in LA.
Yeah.
And of the Scientology schools, it's known as a really good one. It's definitely uh, the only school that has probably gotten people into college or things like that. And so I kind of started a whole new chapter when coming up here to LA. And mom followed shortly after. Her and my dad gave getting together a couple times a shot. They went to the Scientology chaplain and ended up not working out. But we all ended up in LA.
Okay. And so you told your mom that she was an SP, she was a suppressive person. And
Mhm.
why was that, according to you? How did you define that?
Um, she had, truthfully, she had lost her mom and she was going through a real rough time. And Scientology doesn't allow you to grieve. You're not like, if you show emotion, it's a weakness. And so even going through seeing my grandma pass away and all of this, I think I saw my mom cry one time. And I think that instead of letting those emotions out, she did other things that, um, like kind of hurt our family unit. And so for me, I was just really upset that I felt like she was being selfish and like unreasonable. And I don't know, I just took it all out on her. I was really pissed. And also that her and my dad were getting divorced. I think my dad didn't really want to divorce my mom. I think my mom wanted the divorce. And so I was such a daddy's girl that I was really upset with her for, I don't know, the divorce and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that whole idea, though, of showing emotion being a weakness, there is something that can come across as so cold, so heartless. that here your mom is grieving, and then she's seen as having something wrong with her, which is very common when people get certain illnesses also within Scientology or other groups that they are often not given the compassion, not even sympathy, but just compassion that you are afforded by people just in the general community, or someone, who, you're at the, I don't know, laundromat with, and you say you're not well, and they'll show you compassion. But instead, it gets redirected back on you. And so you were just participating in that system.
Yeah. And also, just to your point, on the emotional tone scale, which we pretty much memorized early on, no sympathy is higher than sympathy. So you're better off having no sympathy for somebody than any sympathy at all if you're a true Scientologist.
So, in retrospect, why do you think that was a value of L. Ron Hubbard's, to have no sympathy?
Because then you can't have sympathy for yourself. I mean, I think when you're that hardened and, you don't want to, and also just wrongdoing. Like, if you went around having sympathy for everybody who was upset, or
Yeah,
it would cause a problem in there.
it definitely would, right? Because then people would be distracted, and they wouldn't have that kind of very strong resolve, that work ethic, that being able to have your mind very directed. And I guess emotion gets in the way. I think what also happens is that then there can be divided allegiance. And if somebody wants you just to be focused on kind of what they want you to be focused on and furthering the goals of the group, if you are feeling bad and if you're having sorrow or loss or whatever it is, that can slow you down, and that can slow down your production level and all of it. And you can also be thinking about other people and not thinking about him or people he wants you to be thinking about. Yeah, I was just always wondering about why there wasn't that kind of sympathy. I remember also hearing a story about uh, a boy who said that he was raised at a Scientology school, and that if someone fell and hurt themselves, that he wasn't supposed to go over and help them get up. That was going to be interfering with something.
Yes.
And so, what is that about?
That's a funny question, but it's an interesting one. When you hurt yourself, and I hated doing this when I was younger, I would tell my mom, contact assists don't work on me. Like, that was my line. So when you hurt yourself, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about moments of pain and unconsciousness becoming recorded engrams in your subconscious that later you would act out on or whatever. So, say you stub your toe, the whole idea would be to have everybody around you be as quiet as possible. And then you run through the incident again, meaning you recreate it. You don't actually hurt yourself, but you go through all the motions. And you do this over and over again until the sensation of pain is gone. And I know it sounds crazy, but like when everybody says it works, you're the weirdo if it doesn't work. So that's why you're quiet. It's the same idea of the subconscious recording. So you wouldn't just run over and help somebody. That's the only reason why.
Oh, it's so interesting, because it's just another example of how the social norms are all so different, and I think why it is such a challenge when people are raised here, like in LA, and I'm living in LA, but the way you learn to interact with people is so different. Like you were raised in another country.
Yeah, that's exactly how it feels. Yeah, you learn. I mean, we had our own entire culture. It's like leaving Scientology is like landing on Earth, and like, oh, and then also realizing that a lot of things that you thought you knew the right answer to, or you thought are completely not like that in the real world. And it's a really interesting tailspin at first.
One more thing before you go. Vanessa will be speaking with all of us again next week for part 2 of our conversation. And also, we'll have a third conversation with me that will be released in a few weeks on Patreon for the Patreon subscribers. So feel free to go to patreon.com/indoctrination and become a subscriber. It's a very powerful interview, and you will be notified as a patron when it comes out. So this week, Vanessa starts a conversation with me that I know is not an easy one. There is usually a lot of fear and risk, most definitely risk for people who know that when they tell their story, even though all they're doing is saying what happened to them and how they feel about it and sharing their experiences and their hurts and their insights, still it can cause organizations to mistreat them and cause their families and friends to feel the need to disengage from them. So the risk is real. Vanessa is in a place in her life where she is saying that she has the right to speak freely, to have her reactions to her experiences validated. I'm grateful that she entrusted me with her story, and we will again be continuing with the second part next week and the third fascinating conversation that will be released on Patreon. Vanessa talked today about how her parents got into Scientology, and the way her mother got in specifically was something I wanted to talk about. Her mother got in by taking the Scientology personality test. I don't know if any of you have seen it. I have a lot of copies in my office. They're all pink and folded in 3 different parts. And I think they're pink on purpose, so they seem innocuous and kind of friendly. The test goes by the name the Oxford Inventory Analysis, and it has zero connection at all with the University of Oxford in England or even Oxford anything, Oxford shoes, Oxford comma. It was developed by people who knew L. Ron Hubbard and is now not only given out on the street and is something you can complete online, but from talking to someone whose job it was to give out these personality tests, the goals were twofold and maybe even threefold. The first, according to him, was that he wanted people to truly believe that they had been able to evaluate themselves and see what they were really like by answering the many questions on this personality test. Some of the questions seem quite usual, while others seem quite bizarre. You can check it out. And the next part was to be able to bring people into courses and let them know what seemed to be problematic with their personality based on these scores, and to offer the courses in auditing and other programs to help people with their supposed personality issues. And the other reason, which makes it threefold, according to him, was that they were really making people feel indebted. That here they were receiving a personality test and it was free. And it's usually something you need to pay someone quite a lot of money to get. So it was already setting up something that we've talked about, the principle of reciprocity. If I'm getting something that usually costs a lot of money for free, I will feel more willing and open to be wanting to give something back, to give of my time or my money or my openness to signing up for courses that then might help me. What people are not told when taking this test is that it's not considered a legitimate inventory or test of any kind by anyone within the psychological community or even the psychometric community. Psychometric community are people who give tests and do assessments and analyses. So the results then don't necessarily have any accuracy. And there is a rumor that someone told me that I have yet to substantiate, but here it is, that L. Ron Hubbard was the person who first took the test. So his scores are the ones that show a healthy personality. And if anyone answers the questions any differently than the way he did, the graph of the results that they are left with is one that shows them to have issues that they need help with. So, depending upon how you feel about L. Ron Hubbard and his mental health, then you will know how skewed this all potentially could be and confusing it is, to say the least. So, why does it all matter to me? It's important to know what method is being used to evaluate you and if it's based on something that is biased, and to know why you're being given the test. What's the intention, the purpose? And is it for your insight, growth, and health, or to sell you a product? And if you know about yourself that you're going to be swayed by and powerfully impacted by the results of such a test, and if it's going to affect how you feel about yourself and make you feel you need help, do not take a personality test that's handed to you on the street. We don't need a test that shifts and lowers our self concept and self confidence. It's easy enough just to get that in life, to get a skewed view of yourself. There are plenty of people who are bullied and insulted and inaccurately diagnosed. And I treat a lot of people who are raised feeling that they are, for example, overly emotional and overly sentimental when it's just that they were raised by parents who had no patience for emotion or did not know how to respond to their emotions or who had a difficult life when they were growing up, so there was just no room for emotion. But it didn't mean that their children were overly emotional because in another family, chances are their reactions to things or their emotions would have fit right in and would have been seen as usual, typical, normal, thoughtful, caring. So it's always important to know how you're being evaluated and what the sources are of that evaluation and that diagnosis. If there's a particular leaning or a reason they have for wanting you to believe a certain way about yourself, then it's really important to understand what game is being played here. Within cults and within relationships where there is gaslighting, up is down and down is up, and everything is quite the opposite. So the way you're being evaluated, potentially as oppositional or abusive or whatever other dramatic term might be used to label you, it's probably not only slightly inaccurate, but probably the opposite of the truth. I can't and won't stop you from taking the Oxford inventory, but after you take it and suddenly you have 12 other things you think are wrong with you, then the purpose of it, I think, was to influence you to feel that you need help and their help. And then, if they have just the right class or treatment or way to help you with your newfound problems, you'll know it's a business that's making money off this test's ability to stir up your anxiety about yourself. It can be a salesperson's job to try to sell you what you need, but also a salesperson's job to sell you what you don't need at all. To walk up to a person buying an antique car and say, "Oh, it would be a shame for you to drive around in that car without just the right white wall tires to go with it." Or the salesperson to say that a beautiful dress is so perfect for you, and I think you should buy it, and we have it in your size, and the color is just right for you. But it wouldn't look right unless you have good shoes to go with it. So let me show you to our shoe department. We've all had those kinds of sales pitches given to us, but it's different when someone is telling us something about ourselves. And if you want to find out more about the Oxford Capacity Analysis, check out the video called Scientology's Personality Test, Science or Scam on Chris Shelton's YouTube channel. It's wonderful. Those administering this test don't know about all that ails you. They are not qualified to tell you what kind of help you need. They are not inspired people or seers. Keeping yourself safe includes knowing when to tell if someone is a prophet or just trying to make a profit. Talk to you next week. Indoctrination is available for download on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, and more. Please support Indoctrination at patreon.com/indoctrination. Subscribers receive bonus episodes, interviews, and other cool goodies. Send us an email at indoctrinationshow@gmail.com. Thank you for your support. And if you can't become a paid subscriber, I will be so grateful for any and all support that you show. Whether it's subscribing on SoundCloud, YouTube, or Patreon, or giving us a like on our Indoctrination Facebook page, or following our Twitter and Reddit feeds. Thank you for keeping up with us and for keeping the show going. Until next time, Rachel.